A man walks the streets with crumpled flyers, searching for a year for the daughter who vanished after a tragic accident. When a little boy points to the flyer and says, "She lives at my house," the father's world stops. And what this father decides to do next doesn't destroy one family, it builds two. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The Chicago sun beat down on the streets of the Lincoln Park neighborhood that Thursday afternoon, scorching the asphalt and making the air shimmer in invisible waves of heat. Michael Sullivan walked slowly down Clark Street, his shuffling steps betraying the exhaustion of someone who hadn't truly rested in a very long time. The simple clothes he wore, a faded white shirt and worn-out jeans, clung to his sweaty body. In his arms he held a stack of wrinkled flyers, all bearing the same image printed in ink that was already starting to fade. The smiling face of a 6-year-old girl, her light brown hair in 2 pigtails, her bright eyes full of life. Sophia. The name was printed just below the photo, followed by a phone number, and the word Michael repeated in his mind like a prayer: missing. It had been exactly 1 year since his life had been turned upside down. 1 year since that rainy November day, when everything he knew as family and happiness was ripped away from him in an instant. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, but the memory came rushing back with full force, as it always did when he let his guard down. The heavy rain, the flooded streets, the deafening sound of the impact, the screams, the shattering glass, and then the silence. That horrible silence that still echoed in his ears every night. Claire, his wife, had been taken from him that day. The word still hurt as it formed in his mind. Taken. As if she had chosen to leave, when in reality she had been torn from him in the cruelest way possible. And Sophia, his little Sophia, had disappeared in the ensuing chaos. In shock, terrified, traumatized, the little girl had run from the scene before anyone could reach her. Witnesses said she was in a panic, screaming, not understanding what had happened, and then she simply vanished into the rain-soaked streets of Chicago. Michael taped another flyer to a lamppost, securing it with tape that was losing its stickiness from the sweat on his hands. He knew this flyer would probably be torn down in a few days, replaced by a concert ad or a lost dog notice. But he kept going. Every single day, without exception, he walked through different neighborhoods of the city, putting up flyers, talking to people, asking if anyone had seen his daughter. Guilt consumed him from the inside like a silent parasite. If he had just listened to Claire that morning, if he hadn't insisted on going out despite the heavy rain, if he had driven slower, if. 1,000 what-ifs that kept him from sleeping, that turned his nights into tormented vigils, that made him wake up gasping in the middle of the night, searching for a daughter who was no longer there. In the first few months, the police had been dedicated to the search. They had checked hospitals, shelters, spoken with social workers. But a traumatized child in a city of over 2 million people was like looking for a needle in an infinite haystack. Over time, the case went cold. Other disappearances happened. Other families joined the line of pain and waiting, and Michael found himself alone in his search, supported only by a few friends who, little by little, also drifted away, tired of his obsession. He had sold almost everything he owned to keep looking. The condo where they lived was gone, replaced by a small rented room in the uptown neighborhood. The car, sold. His savings, spent on printing flyers, trips to nearby towns following false leads, calls to numbers that never led anywhere. Michael had lost his job as a store manager after repeatedly missing work to follow potential traces of Sophia. Now he survived on odd jobs, making deliveries, hauling boxes, taking any work that offered the flexibility to continue his search. The afternoon wore on, and Michael turned right onto a residential street. His feet ached, but he barely felt it anymore. Physical pain had become just another background noise amidst the constant turmoil in his mind. He put up 3 more flyers in a row, 1 on each block, always choosing high-traffic spots. Bakeries, bus stops, school entrances, places where people stopped, even for a few seconds, and might see Sophia's face looking back at them. Nobody cares, Michael thought bitterly, as he watched people hurry past, avoiding his gaze. To the world, he was just another disturbed man handing out flyers on the street, another one of the city's lost souls. But he couldn't stop. To stop would mean giving up, and giving up on Sophia was giving up on himself, on everything that still made sense in his existence. It was as he was taping a flyer to the door of a small corner store in the Bucktown neighborhood that everything changed. Michael had his back turned, smoothing the edges of the paper, when he heard a child's voice behind him. "I know her." Michael froze. His heart pounded so fast that for a moment he thought he might pass out. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. Before him stood a boy of about 9 or 10, thin, wearing an oversized Cubs jersey and faded shorts. The boy had sun-kissed skin, short black hair, and dark eyes that were staring at the flyer with a mixture of curiosity and recognition. "What did you say, kid?" Michael's voice came out shaky, filled with a hope he barely dared to feel. "That girl on the flyer. I know her." The boy pointed to Sophia's picture with a dirt-smudged finger. "She lives at my house." Michael's world seemed to stop spinning. How many times had he heard those words? How many false leads had he followed? How many well-meaning people had sworn they'd seen his daughter, only for him to discover it was another child, or a confused memory, or just someone trying to help without any real information? But there was something in this boy's certainty, in the direct way he spoke, that made Michael's heart clench with a different kind of intensity. "Are you sure?" Michael knelt on the sidewalk to be at the boy's level, his hands trembling as he gently held the boy's shoulders. "Look closely at the picture. Are you absolutely sure it's this girl?" The boy looked at the flyer again, leaning in and furrowing his brow in concentration. After a few seconds that felt like hours to Michael, he nodded with conviction. "Yeah, that's her. Same hair, but it's longer now, and she has a little mark right here next to her eye." The boy pointed to the outer corner of his left. "Sounds just like in the picture." Michael felt tears burn his eyes. Sophia did have that tiny birthmark, almost unnoticeable, that only someone who lived with her would notice. The boy couldn't have known that just from looking at the flyer from a distance. The photo didn't even show that detail clearly. "How did she end up at your house? When? How long ago?" The boy shrugged, looking around as if searching for something or someone. "I don't know. One day she just showed up at our house. My mom said she was my sister now, but I think it's weird, you know? 'Cause we didn't have a sister before, and then suddenly she was there. My mom doesn't like it when I ask questions about it. Where's your house? Can you take me there?" Michael's voice was louder than he intended, startling the boy a little. He tried to compose himself, softening his tone. "Please, kid, this girl is my daughter. She disappeared a year ago. I need to see her." The boy hesitated, biting his lower lip. The conflict was visible on his face, but then he nodded. "Okay, but my mom's gonna be mad." "Don't worry about that. I just want to confirm if it's her. If it is, we'll handle everything the right way, I promise." The boy started walking, and Michael followed, his heart beating so hard he could hear the pulse hammering in his ears. They walked for about 15 minutes, leaving the busier streets behind and entering narrower alleys, where the houses were simpler and packed tightly together. The neighborhood was now Bridgeport, a working-class area of Chicago, where the uneven, cracked pavement made Michael stumble with every step. Finally, the boy stopped in front of a small, single-story house with peeling yellow paint and a rusty iron gate. Clothes were hanging on a line in the tiny yard, and the sound of a TV came from inside. "This is it," the boy said, pointing. "But you probably shouldn't go in now. My mom's home." Michael looked at the simple house, feeling an overwhelming mix of hope and fear. What if it was her? What if finally, after a whole year of desperate searching, his Sophia was right there, on the other side of that door? But what if it was another false lead? What if he knocked on that door and found only more disappointment? "I need to know now." Michael took a step toward the gate. "Mister, wait." The boy grabbed his shirt. "Seriously, my mom won't let you in. She gets really mad when anyone talks about my sister." That only confirmed Michael's suspicions. If the woman got nervous when asked about the girl, something was wrong. But he couldn't just storm into the house. He needed to think, to be smart. "Call the police." But what if it wasn't Sophia? What if the woman had legally adopted a similar-looking girl? "What's your name, kid?" "Gabriel." "Gabriel, thank you for bringing me here. You did the right thing." Michael pulled a crumpled piece of paper and a pen from his pocket. He wrote down his phone number. "If you see your sister, or if she leaves the house, call me at this number." "Can you do that?" Gabriel took the paper and stuffed it in his shorts pocket, nodding, but then he glanced back, startled. Michael followed his gaze and saw a woman appear at the door of the house. She was in her early 30s, short and thin, with black hair pulled into a messy bun. She was wearing a simple house dress and flip-flops. When she saw the boy talking to Michael on the street, her face changed completely, from tired to panicked. "Gabriel, get in the house now!" Her voice was sharp, frightened. Gabriel looked at Michael one last time before running through the gate. The woman came down the 3 front steps and walked to the gate, gripping the iron bars with both hands, her wide eyes fixed on Michael with obvious fear. "What do you want? Why are you talking to my son?" Michael took a deep breath, trying to control the flood of emotions, threatening to erupt inside him. He held up one of the flyers he was still carrying. "My name is Michael Sullivan. This is my daughter, Sophia. She disappeared a year ago. Your son said he recognized her, that she lives here." The woman turned pale. Her hands tightened on the gate bars so hard her knuckles turned white. She shook her head frantically. "No, no, sir. My son is mistaken. There's no girl matching that description here. He must be confused." But the way she spoke, the desperation in her voice, the way she avoided looking directly at the flyer, it all screamed that she was lying. Michael felt anger begin to boil inside him. "Look, Mum, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know if my daughter is in there. If she is, we'll sort this out the right way. Police, social services, whatever it takes. But I need to see if it's her." "I already told you there's no one here," the woman said, taking a step back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my work." "Please." Michael's voice broke. "Just let me see. That's all. If it's not her, I'll leave and never bother you again." The woman stood there for a moment, tears starting to stream down her face. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then shook her head one more time. "I'm sorry for what you're going through. I really am. But there's no one here. And now you need to leave or I'll have to call the police." Before Michael could answer, she turned and ran back into the house, slamming the door shut. He stood there in front of the gate, feeling the world collapse on his shoulders once again. But something, inside him, something he had learned in a year of searching and disappointment, told him this time was different. That woman's fear wasn't the fear of someone being bothered by a stranger. It was the fear of someone with something to hide. Michael backed away from the house, but he didn't leave. He walked to the street corner and stood there, leaning against a wall where he could see the front of the house. He would wait. He would watch. And sooner or later, he would find out the truth. The hours passed slowly. The sun began to set, painting the Chicago sky in shades of orange and pink. The streets emptied out as people returned from work. Children were called inside. Michael remained there, ignoring the hunger gnawing at his stomach, ignoring his thirst, ignoring his exhaustion. None of it mattered. After a year, he finally had a real lead. He could feel it in his bones. Night fell and lights came on in the houses. Michael saw the woman's silhouette moving through the living room window. She seemed agitated, pacing back and forth. At one point, she approached the window and looked out as if searching for someone. Michael shrank further against the wall, staying in the shadows. That's when he saw her. A smaller shadow passed by the window. A child. A girl. Michael's heart raced again. He couldn't see the face clearly from that distance and with the dim lighting, but the size, the shape, it matched. He had to get closer. Carefully, Michael crossed the street, keeping to the darkest areas. He approached the house from the side, where there were no windows facing the street. There was a small gap between that house and the next, too narrow for an adult to pass through, but he could see through it. On the other side was a small backyard, and through the kitchen window, lit by a dim bulb, he could see inside the house. And then he saw The woman was sitting at the kitchen table, and next to her, sitting in a chair too high for her, was a little girl, light brown hair, longer now, falling over her shoulders. The girl was eating something, spoon in hand, focused on her plate. Michael couldn't see her face from where he was, but everything in him screamed that this was Sophia. He wanted to scream, to bang on the door, to break it down and rush inside, but something stopped him. The scene he was watching through the window was strangely familiar and yet completely wrong. The woman was stroking the girl's hair affectionately. The girl smiled. They looked like a mother and daughter, and that's what hurt the most. Because while he had spent an entire year searching desperately, his daughter was here, living another life with someone else. The tears finally came. Michael let them fall freely, silently, as he watched through that window at the daughter he had lost. But she wasn't lost. She was here. And now he had to figure out how to bring her back without destroying her in the process, because for the first time in a year, Michael realized that perhaps the biggest challenge wasn't finding Sophia. The biggest challenge would be making her remember who he was. Inside the house, Helen Fisher hugged the girl she had learned to call Clara. Her heart was tight, her chest ached. She knew that man would be back. She knew the day she had dreaded most had finally arrived, and now she had to decide what to do. How had it come to this? How had a decision made in a moment of weakness and love turned into this gigantic lie that now threatened to come crashing down? Gabriel watched everything from the hallway, confused and scared. Had he done the right thing by telling that man? Or had he just destroyed the only family he knew? The piece of paper with the phone number burned in his pocket like a secret too dangerous to carry alone. But something inside him, something that sounded like a conscience, told him he couldn't just ignore the truth. That man with the flyers looked so desperate. What if that girl really was his daughter? What if she had another family looking for her? The night wore on, and Michael stayed there until the lights in the house finally went out. Only then did he walk away, slowly making his way back to his rented room. But this time, for the first time in a year, he wasn't returning empty-handed. He was returning with a certainty that burned in his chest like a newly lit flame. Sophia was alive. Sophia was here. And somehow he was going to bring her back. But as he walked through the deserted streets of Chicago, a question began to form in his mind, heavy and terrifying. What if Sophia didn't want to come back? What if she didn't recognize him? What if, after a year of living with that woman, she had completely erased the memory of who Michael and Claire were? What would happen then? Michael had no answers, but he knew he had to find them, and fast. Helen Fisher couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake until the early hours of the morning, staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny bedroom. As her mind spun in endless circles, the man's face wouldn't leave her thoughts, his eyes desperate and full of pain, the way he held that flyer as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. She knew this day would come. Deep down, she always had. But she had hoped, prayed, begged the universe that it never would. From the other room, separated from hers by only a thin plywood wall, Helen could hear Clara's steady breathing. That name had come to her naturally the day she found the girl, lost and in shock, wandering alone through the rain-soaked streets near the Illinois Medical District exactly 12 months ago. Clara. Light. That's what the girl represented to her in that dark moment of her life. Helen got out of bed without making a sound and walked to the kids' room. She opened the door slowly, just enough to peek inside. The streetlight filtered through the curtainless window, partially illuminating the small room. Gabriel was asleep in his bed against the left wall, wrapped in a thin sheet, snoring softly. In the bed on the right, Clara was lying on her side, hugging a worn-out teddy bear that Helen had bought at a thrift store for $2 right after the girl arrived. Looking at that peaceful, innocent face, Helen felt her chest tighten. How had it come to this? How had a decision made on an impulse of kindness turned into a lie so big it now threatened to swallow everything? She closed the door carefully and went back to the kitchen. She turned on the dim light and sat at the same table where she had eaten dinner with the children just hours before. Her hands trembled as she filled a glass with water from the tap and drank it in small sips. She needed to think. She needed to decide what to do before it was too late. The whole story had started so simply. Helen was a housekeeper, working Monday through Saturday at the home of a wealthy family in the Gold Coast neighborhood, cleaning, cooking, taking care of everything. The money barely covered the rent on the simple house where she lived with Gabriel, her only son, the result of a relationship that had ended when the boy was just 2. Gabriel's father had left Chicago promising to send money every month. He never did. Helen raised her son alone with dignity and hard work. On that November day last year, she was coming home from work, braving the heavy rain that was lashing the city. She had taken 2 crowded buses and still had to walk 3 blocks to get home. That's when she saw the girl. Tiny, soaked, wandering aimlessly with a vacant look in her eyes and torn clothes. Helen stopped immediately. Her maternal instinct screamed louder than anything else. "Hey, sweetie, are you lost?" The girl didn't answer. She just looked at Helen with those huge, frightened eyes, shivering also. "Over?" Her lips purple from the cold. She was barefoot, her feet bruised and bleeding. Helen didn't think twice. She took off her own coat and wrapped it around the child, picking her up. "Come on, come with me. We'll get you warm and find your family." She took the girl home, gave her a warm bath, clean clothes that had belonged to Gabriel when he was smaller, and a hot meal. The child ate as if she hadn't had food in days, but she remained silent, explaining nothing. She seemed to be in another world, her eyes always distant, as if she wasn't really there. Helen planned to take the girl to the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, the next day. But when she woke up in the morning and saw her sleeping next to Gabriel, so small and fragile, something inside her hesitated. She thought she'd wait one more day to see if the child improved, if she could talk and explain what had happened. One day turned into 2. 2 turned into a week. And in that week, the girl began to cling to Helen in an intense, desperate way. She didn't want Helen to leave her side for a second. She cried when Helen went to work. She slept wrapped in her arms every night. And Helen, who had spent the last 8 years raising a son alone, having never had a daughter, felt something awaken inside her. A fierce, protective, maternal love she didn't know she was still capable of feeling. The girl needed her. And, it was hard to admit, but she needed the girl too. That's when Helen made the mistake that would change everything. Instead of taking the child to the authorities, she decided to look for the family on her own. She scanned newspapers, listened to the news, paid attention to neighbors' conversations, and that's how she found out. The accident, the woman who had died, the missing child, Sophia Sullivan. By the time Helen made the connection, when she realized the girl in her house was the one everyone was looking for, it was too late. 3 weeks had already passed. 3 weeks in which the girl had started to smile again, to play with Gabriel, to call her Mommy in the few words she could manage. How could Helen just give her back now? How could she rip that child from the only place where she was starting to feel safe again? She tried. God knew she had tried. She took the girl by the hand one morning, determined to take her to the police station and explain everything. But as they were leaving the house, the child started screaming, thrashing, crying so desperately that the neighbors started looking out their windows. The girl hugged Helen with all her might and screamed a single word, clear as crystal: "No!" Helen broke down. She went back inside, locked the door, and cried for hours, holding the girl. And it was in that moment that she made the decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was going to keep her. She was going to raise this girl as her own daughter. But to do that, she would have to hide the truth. She would have to lie to the world, to her neighbors, to her own son. She changed the girl's name. Sophia became Clara. She cut the child's hair a little differently, bought new clothes. She told Gabriel that Clara was the daughter of a distant cousin who had fallen on hard times and couldn't care for the girl. Gabriel, only 9 at the time, believed her without much question. Children have an incredible capacity to accept change. Time passed. Clara, little by little, began to forget. The trauma of the accident, the memory of her parents, it was all being buried deep in her young mind. She started to live in the present, to build a new life with Helen and Gabriel. She laughed, she played, she went to the school. Helen managed to enroll her in using fake documents she bought from a shady contact. Clara became part of the family, and Helen became her mother. But the fear never went away. Every night before bed, Helen prayed that no one would find out. She avoided going out much with Clara, especially to more central parts of the city where the girl's father might be looking. She stuck to her small, controlled routine. Home, work, the neighborhood grocery store, Clara's school, nothing more. And it worked. For a whole year, it worked. Until that afternoon, when Gabriel came home, and Helen saw in his eyes that something had happened. The boy was different, quiet, thoughtful, and then, during dinner, he finally spoke. "Mom, why doesn't Clara have any old pictures like I do?" Helen almost choked on her food. Gabriel had never questioned the story she'd told about Clara being a cousin's daughter, but now, at 10, he was starting to notice the inconsistencies. "What do you mean, honey?" "Like I have pictures of when I was a baby when I was little, but Clara doesn't have any old pictures. Why?" "Because when she came to live with us, her mom didn't send the pictures." Helen tried to keep her voice steady. "But we'll take lots of new pictures of her. Don't you worry." Gabriel fell silent, but Helen could tell he wasn't entirely convinced, and it was that night, after the kids were asleep, that he appeared in the kitchen holding the crumpled piece of paper with a phone number. "Mom, I have to tell you something." Helen felt her blood run cold as she listened to her son recount his meeting with the man from the flyer. Every word was like a stab wound. The man knew. He had seen the house. He would be back. It was only a matter of time, and now, sitting alone. Kitchen at 3 in the morning, Helen had to decide. Should she take Clara and run? Move to another city? Start over somewhere else? But with what money? How would she explain it to Gabriel? And more importantly, would that be the right thing to do? For the first time in a year, Helen allowed herself to think about Clara's father. Michael. She had seen the name in the papers. A man who had lost everything in a single day. His wife, his daughter, probably his job, his home, everything. While she was building a life with Clara, he was suffering, searching, desperate. The tears began to fall. Helen buried her face in her hands and wept silently. She loved Clara. She loved that little girl as if she had come from her own womb. But that love was born from a lie, and lies, no matter how well-intentioned, always came with a price. Outside the house, hidden in the shadows of a nearby wall, Michael Sullivan wasn't sleeping either. He had returned to that street as soon as the sun came up, determined to find out the truth. He spent the whole morning watching the house from a distance. He saw Helen leave for work, leaving the children with an elderly neighbor. He saw Gabriel go to school, and he saw Clara, his daughter. There was no longer any doubt in his mind. He recognized her the instant she appeared at the door, even with the different hair, even with clothes he had never seen. It was Sophia. The way she walked, the way she tilted her head when she was curious about something, even the way she swung her arms as she walked. It was all her. It was all his daughter. But Sophia didn't look at him, not even in his direction. She was playing with other kids on the street, laughing, running, completely oblivious to the fact that her father was there, just a few yards away, with a shattered heart. She looked happy, healthy, normal, as if she hadn't been through any trauma, as if she didn't have a family searching for her for a year. Michael wanted to run to her, scoop her up in his arms, and take her away immediately, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the fear of scaring her. Maybe it was the uncertainty of how she would react. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time, he realized that simply taking Sophia back wouldn't be enough. She wasn't the same girl he knew. A year in the life of a 6-year-old was an eternity. She had changed, grown, and probably forgotten. He needed help. He needed to do this the right way, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to just break into that house, grab his daughter, and run. The internal conflict was devastating. Just then, his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. Michael answered, his heart pounding. "Hello?" "Mr. Sullivan." The voice on the other end was a child's, hesitant. It was Gabriel. "Yes, it's me. What's wrong?" "I'm calling without my mom knowing." There was a pause. She's been really nervous since yesterday. She didn't sleep at all last night. I think she's scared." "Of what?" "That you'll take my sister away." Gabriel sighed. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, that she's your daughter. And I think it's true. My mum never really wanted to talk about where Clara came from, and now I found her diary." "Diary?" Michael sat up straight, paying full attention. "Yeah, my mom writes in a notebook every night. I've never read it before, but this morning I took a peek." Gabriel lowered his voice even more. "It's all in there, sir. How she found Clara lost on the street. How she was too scared to give her back. Everything. She writes that she regrets it, but that she can't let the girl go, that she loves her too much." Michael felt a mix of anger and understanding. Anger because this woman had his daughter for a whole year, letting him suffer. But understanding because in some twisted way she had saved Sophia. She had cared for her when he couldn't, but that didn't change the fact that Sophia was his. She was his daughter, and he had the right to have her back. "Gabriel, can you do me a favor?" "Depends. Can you take a picture of the diary, of the pages where your mom talks about finding Clara? I need that proof." There was a long silence. Gabriel was clearly torn between loyalty to his mother and what he knew was right. "I'll think about it." His voice trembled. "But sir, what's going to happen to my mom? Is she going to jail?" Michael didn't know what to say. Technically, the woman had committed a crime. She had hidden a missing child, failed to report finding her to the authorities, created false documents. She could indeed go to jail, but at the same time, she had cared for Sophia. She had given her a home, food, love. Things weren't as black and white as Michael wished they were. "I don't know, Gabriel, but I promise I'll try to resolve this in the best way possible. I just need to be absolutely sure that Clara is my Sophia first, and have proof to show the authorities." "Okay, I'll see what I can do, but please don't hurt my mum. She's not a bad person, she just—" Gabriel's voice broke. "She just wanted a daughter." The call ended, and Michael sat there on the curb, holding his phone like an anchor. Everything was happening too fast. A day ago he had no leads. Now, not only did he know where Sophia was, but he was about to have concrete proof. But with hope came fear. Fear of the inevitable confrontation. Fear of Sophia's reaction. Fear of discovering that his daughter didn't want him back. The hours dragged on. Michael bought a sandwich from a street cart and ate it without tasting it, his eyes always returning to the yellow house. Helen arrived home from work in the late afternoon, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Gabriel came back from school. The lights came on one by one as night fell over Chicago. It was almost 10 o'clock when Michael's phone vibrated. A message from Gabriel. It was 3 photos, taken hastily and crookedly, but perfectly legible. The pages of Helen's diary. And there in her neat, tight cursive was the whole. Truth. How she had found a lost and frightened little girl. How she had tried to find the family. How she had discovered who the girl was but couldn't bring herself to return her. How love and fear had created a prison she didn't know how to escape. The last sentence Helen had written, dated the previous night, made Michael close his eyes tightly. "I know I'm wrong. I know this man deserves to have his daughter back. But how do I rip my own heart out of my chest and keep on living?" Michael put his phone away and took a deep breath. He had what he needed. He had the proof. Now it was time to act. But as he walked back to his rented room, planning his next steps, a realization began to form in his mind. This wasn't going to end with him simply taking Sophia back and moving on. This was going to be much more complicated, much more painful, for everyone involved. But he couldn't wait any longer. A year had already been too long. Michael Sullivan spent another sleepless night. But this time it was different. It wasn't the despair of uncertainty that kept him awake, but the anxiety of finally having a plan. Sitting on the narrow bed in his rented room, with the dim light of the lamp flickering beside him, he organized everything he had gathered. The photos of Helen's diary, printed at a nearby FedEx office. The old flyers with Sophia's picture. The missing person report he had carried folded in his wallet for months. It was all there, forming a puzzle that finally made sense. But with clarity came a torturous doubt. How to do this the right way? Would simply showing up with the police and taking Sophia from that house be the best path? Or was there a less traumatic way to reconnect with his daughter? He decided he needed professional guidance. At 7 in the morning, just as the sun began to light up the Chicago sky, Michael was at the door of the regional DCFS office. He waited for over an hour until someone arrived to open up. When he was finally seen, he poured out the entire story to a social worker named Jessica, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen it all. Jessica listened in silence, making occasional notes in an old notebook. When Michael finished showing her all the proof he had gathered, she sighed deeply. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand your pain and your urgency, but I need you to understand something very important." She leaned forward, fixing her eyes on him. "Your daughter has been through severe trauma. She witnessed a terrible accident where she lost her mother. She ran away in shock, and she has spent an entire year rebuilding her life, even if in an irregular situation. If we just go in there and rip her out of that reality, it could cause even greater psychological damage. So what should I do? Leave her there?" Michael felt his frustration rising. "That's my daughter, and she will always be your daughter. But you need to think about her well-being above all else." Jessica flipped through some pages of a child welfare manual on her desk. The ideal approach would be a gradual reintegration. First, you would slowly become a part of her life again. Supervised visits. Let her get used to your presence again, start to remember. Only then, when she's emotionally ready, would we make the full transition. "And how long would that take?" Michael asked, though he feared the answer. "Weeks, maybe months, it depends on how she reacts." Jessica paused. "And as for Ms. Fisher, will you be pressing charges?" "That's not just up to me." Michael rubbed his face with his hands. "Legally, she committed crimes, but she also took care of my daughter when no one else could. I don't know how to feel about it." "It's a complex situation," Jessica agreed. "I'll have to report the case to the authorities, but I will emphasize that the focus should be on the child's well-being, not punishment. Are you willing to follow the protocol for gradual reintegration?" Michael thought of all the nights he had spent searching for Sophia, of all the suffering of the past year. Part of him wanted to just grab his daughter and never look back. But the part of him that was a father, that loved Sophia above all else, knew that Jessica was right. He couldn't be selfish. He couldn't think only of his own pain. He had to think about what was best for Sophia. "Yes," he finally answered. "I'm willing. But please make it happen fast. I can't wait any longer." In the Bridgeport neighborhood, Helen woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. She had dreamed of Claire, Clara's mother, whom she had never met, but whose face she had seen so many times in the news. In the dream, Claire asked her why she had stolen her daughter. Helen tried to explain that it wasn't stealing, it was love, but the words came out jumbled and nonsensical. She got up, made coffee, and woke the children for school. Gabriel was quiet, avoiding her eyes. Helen knew her son felt guilty for showing Michael the diary. She had found the notebook out of place the night before, and it wasn't hard to figure out what had happened. But she didn't blame Gabriel. In fact, a small part of her even felt relieved. The weight of the secret had been crushing. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face the consequences of her choices. Clara appeared in the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Mommy." That word, Mommy, always made Helen's heart ache, because it was both true and a lie. She loved this girl as a mother does. She cared for her as a mother does, but she knew she wasn't her real mother. She never would be. "Good morning, my love. Come have breakfast." The children ate in silence. Helen noticed that even Clara was quieter than usual, as if she could feel the tension in the air. When Gabriel left for school, Helen held Clara's hand before she could leave, too. "Honey, I need to ask you something." Helen knelt to be at the girl's level. "Do you remember anything from before you came to live with me?" Clara frowned, thoughtful. "Sometimes I have dreams, a lady with long hair who sang to me, a place with lots of light, but I don't know if it's a real memory or just my imagination." "And are you happy here with me and Gabriel?" "I am." Clara smiled, but then her face turned serious. "Why are you asking me this? Are we moving?" No. Helen hugged the girl tightly. We're not going anywhere. I just wanted to know if you're happy. But even as she spoke those words, Helen knew they might be a lie, because maybe they were moving. Or worse, maybe Clara would be the one to leave, leaving her behind. After taking Clara to school, Helen went to work as usual, but she couldn't concentrate. She broke 2 plates while doing the dishes. She forgot to vacuum the living room. Her employer asked if she was feeling well, and Helen lied, saying it was just a headache. At 3 in the afternoon, as she was walking home, Helen saw an unfamiliar car parked at the end of her street. Her heart pounded. She knew what it meant. As she got closer, she saw Jessica, the social worker from DCFS whom she recognized getting out of the car, accompanied by Michael Sullivan. Helen's legs felt weak. For a moment she thought about running, grabbing the kids from school, and fleeing. But where to? And for how long? She had no money, no resources, nowhere to go, and more importantly, deep in her heart, she knew it wasn't right to keep running. Jessica approached with a kind but firm smile. "Miss Helen Fisher?" "Yes." Helen's voice came out as a whisper. "We need to talk about Clara, or rather, about Sophia Sullivan." Helen looked at Michael, who stood a few feet away. His eyes were red and swollen, but there was a determination in them that she recognized immediately. It was the look of a father who had found his daughter and wasn't going to let her go again. "I know," Helen said simply. "I know why you're here." They went inside the small house. Helen offered coffee, more out of habit than anything else. Jessica accepted. Michael refused. He was looking around, taking in every detail of the house where his daughter had spent the last year. The simple walls with peeling paint, the old but clean furniture, the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the teddy bear on the sofa. "Ms. Fisher," Jessica began once they were all seated at the same table where so many dinners had taken place, "I need you to tell me, in your own words, how you found Sophia and why you didn't take her to the authorities." Helen took a deep breath. There was no more hiding. With a trembling voice and frequent pauses to control her tears, she told them everything. The rainy day, the lost girl, the initial intention to help, the bond that formed, the fear of giving her back, the lie that grew like a snowball until it was too big to undo. "I know I did wrong," Helen said at the end, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I know I should have taken her to the police station that first day. But I swear on everything I love that I never hurt her. I never let her go hungry or cold. I took care of her as if she were my own daughter." Michael, who had remained silent throughout her account, finally spoke. His voice was controlled but heavy with emotion. "You took my daughter from me. You let me spend an entire year suffering, thinking she could be dead, hurt, who knows what. Meanwhile, you were here raising her as if she were yours." "I know." Helen lowered her head, unable to look at him. "And I'm so sorry. I truly am. But I also saved her. She was lost, traumatized, alone on the street. I took her in, and she's okay now, happy, healthy. That doesn't justify what you did." Michael stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, but Jessica placed a hand on his arm, calming him. "Mr. Sullivan, let's stay calm. This doesn't help anyone." She turned to Helen. "Ms. Fisher, you have committed several crimes, concealment of a missing child, identity fraud with the documents, among others. You could be prosecuted and even lose custody of your son, Gabriel." Helen turned pale. Gabriel. She hadn't thought of that. If she went to jail, what would happen to Gabriel? "But," Jessica continued, "given the unusual circumstances of this case, and considering the child is in fact well cared for, I am going to recommend that the focus be on Sophia's reintegration with her father, not on punitive action. This means that if you cooperate fully, the criminal charges could be reduced or even dropped." "What do I need to do?" Helen asked immediately. "First, accept that Sophia will go back to live with her father, but this will be done gradually so as not to traumatize her." Jessica pulled a folder from her bag. "We'll start with supervised visits from Mr. Sullivan. He will come here, spend time with Sophia, help her remember him. As she adjusts, the visits will become longer. Eventually, she'll spend weekends with him. And finally, when we all agree she's ready, she will move in with him permanently. Helen felt as if she were being stabbed, but she nodded in agreement. And how long will all this take? We don't know. It depends on how Sophia reacts. It could be weeks or months. And during that time, can I still be with her? Yes. But understand that this time is to prepare Sophia for the transition, not to prolong an irregular situation. Helen looked at Michael, who had sat back down, but looked ready to explode with tension. I know you hate me, and you have every right. But please, for your daughter's sake, do this carefully. She doesn't remember anything. To her, I'm her mother. If you just show up and take her away, you'll destroy her. I know that, Michael replied, his voice harsh. That's why I agreed to do it this way, even though I just want to grab her and never come back here. But I'll tell you one thing. If I sense that you're trying to turn my daughter against me, or if you do anything to sabotage this process, I'll end it and take her away on the spot. Understood? Helen nodded. She understood, and in a way, she respected it. Because Michael was fighting for his daughter just as she had fought to keep her. Both were driven by love, even if in completely different and ethically opposite ways. Jessica organized her papers. Well, it's settled then. The first visit will be tomorrow after school. Mr. Sullivan, you will come here at 4 o'clock. You'll spend 2 hours with Sophia, always under my supervision or that of another caseworker. We'll do this 3 times a week initially, and we'll observe how she responds. What if she doesn't recognize me? Michael asked, and for the first time since he had entered that house, Helen saw fear in his eyes. What if she wants nothing to do with me? Then we'll work with that, Jessica answered gently. We have psychologists who specialize in childhood trauma. We will provide all the necessary support for Sophia and for you as well. After Jessica and Michael left, Helen was alone in the empty house. She walked to the kids' room and sat on Clara's bed. She held the teddy bear to her chest and finally allowed the tears to fall freely. She had done so much wrong. She had lied, deceived, hidden. But the love she felt for Clara was real. It was pure. It was the truest thing she had ever felt in her life. And now she would have to let her go. She would have to watch as the girl she had raised for a year was returned to her real father. It was fair. It was right. But it hurt more than anything Helen had ever experienced. When Gabriel got home from school and saw his mother crying, he ran to hug her, and Helen clung to her son, the one who was truly hers, and cried until she had no tears left. Because she knew that, despite all her flaws and mistakes, she had tried to do the best she could. She had loved too much. And sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes love means having the courage to let go. That night, when Clara came home from school and asked why Helen was sad, she lied one last time. She said it was nothing, just tiredness. But as she tucked Clara into bed and sang the same lullaby she sang every night, Helen knew that these numbered days were precious. Every hug, every smile, every mommy whispered by the girl was a memory she would cherish forever. Because tomorrow Michael would arrive, and nothing would ever be the same again. Across town in his rented room, Michael couldn't sleep either. Tomorrow he would see Sophia. After a year. But would she recognize him? Would she see him as a father or a stranger? What if it all went wrong? What if the reintegration process failed? He held the old photo of Claire and Sophia, taken 2 months before the accident. They were both laughing, hugging, happy, a portrait of a life that no longer existed. Michael traced his finger over Sophia's face, feeling the smooth texture of the photo paper. "Tomorrow, my girl," he whispered to the photo. "Tomorrow I start bringing you home." The next day dawned overcast in Chicago, as if the sky itself reflected the tension hanging over everyone involved in this complicated story. Michael woke up early, despite having slept only 3 hours. He showered, shaved for the first time in weeks, and put on his least wrinkled dress shirt. He wanted to look presentable for Sophia. He wanted her to see him as a real father, not the desperate, broken man he had become over the past year. At 2 o'clock, 3 hours before the scheduled time, he was already near Helen's house. He couldn't stand still. He walked the streets of the Bridgeport neighborhood several times, mentally rehearsing what he would say when he saw Sophia. "Hi, honey. Remember me?" Too direct, too scary. "Sophia, I'm your dad." God, that sounded so strange now. "Hello, my name is Michael." No, too ridiculous. He had been that girl's father for 6 years before the accident. How could he be so lost about how to talk to his own daughter? A block away, Helen was also in a panic. She had cleaned the house 3 times, fixed Clara's hair twice, and changed the girl's outfit 4 times. Nothing seemed right for this moment. How do you prepare for the day you start to lose someone you love? Gabriel sat quietly on the sofa, watching everything. The boy was 10, but in that moment he seemed to understand far more than any child his age should. He knew this day would change everything, that the sister he had gained a year ago was, in fact, only on loan, and that soon she would be gone, leaving a void in the house that none of them would know how to fill. Clara, oblivious to the emotional storm around her, played on the living room floor with some plastic figurines, making up stories in her head. Helen watched her every move, every smile, trying to burn it all into her memory. At 4 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the small house like a thunderclap. Helen felt her heart race. Clara looked up, curious. Gabriel remained motionless on the sofa. Helen opened the door, and there they were. Jessica, with her folder of documents and a professional yet compassionate expression, and Michael, looking neater than Helen had seen him before, but with the same red, tired eyes of someone who cries every night. "Good afternoon, Miss Fisher." Jessica entered first. "May we come in?" "Of course." Helen stepped aside, allowing them to enter. And then she saw it, the moment Michael laid eyes on Sophia for the first time since the accident. The man literally stopped walking. He froze in the middle of the living room, staring at the girl on the floor as if he were seeing a ghost or a miracle. "Sophia." The name escaped his lips like a whispered prayer. Clara looked up at the strange man at the door. She frowned, studying him with the natural curiosity of a child, but there was no recognition there, no flicker of memory. She simply saw an unknown man. "Hi," Clara said politely, as Helen had taught her. "What's your name?" Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. She didn't know who he was. His own daughter was asking his name as if he were a complete stranger. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The tears started to fall before he could stop them. Jessica gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Sullivan, breathe. We knew this might happen, remember?" Michael quickly wiped his eyes and tried to smile, though the effort was almost unbearable. "My name is Michael. It's very nice to meet you, Clara." Using the wrong name was like swallowing glass, but Jessica had instructed that initially they should use the name the child identified with. Forcing the name, Sophia could confuse and frighten her. "Do you want to play with me?" Clara offered him one of the figurines. "This one is the prince. He's looking for the lost princess." The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Michael took the figurine with trembling hands and sat on the floor next to Clara. Jessica motioned for Helen and Gabriel to move back a bit, giving them space to interact while remaining nearby. "And where is the lost princess?" Michael asked, his voice still weak with emotion. "She's hiding in the castle," Clara said, pointing to a cardboard box turned on its side that served as the backdrop for their game. "But she's scared to come out because she doesn't remember the prince anymore. She forgot everything." Michael felt his heart shatter once more. It was as if Clara were unconsciously narrating her own story. "And do you think she'll remember one day?" Clara shrugged. "I don't know. My mommy says that sometimes we forget bad things so we don't get sad." Helen, watching from the other side of the room, felt a pang of guilt. She had told Clara that when the girl had nightmares about the accident, trying to explain why some memories didn't come back. But now she realized how those words had helped keep Sophia buried and Clara in charge. The next 45 minutes were a mix of sweet and bitter for Michael. Sweet because he was there near his daughter, watching her smile, hearing her talk. Bitter because she didn't recognize him. She treated him as she would any kind adult who came to play. Politely, but with no real connection. Jessica observed everything, making occasional notes. She noticed that Clara, though polite, kept a certain distance from Michael. She didn't get too close physically, didn't seek contact. Normal behavior with a stranger, but devastating considering this was her father. When the time was up, Michael didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay. There on the living room floor, playing with his daughter forever. But Jessica was firm. Gradual, she repeated. We can't rush it. Will I see you tomorrow? Michael asked Clara, trying to keep his voice cheerful despite the sadness consuming him. If you want, Clara replied, already turning her attention back to her figurines. I want to, Michael assured her. Very much. Outside the house on the street, Michael broke down. He leaned against the wall to keep from falling, gasping for breath between sobs. Jessica waited patiently beside him. She didn't recognize me, not at all, he finally managed to say. It's like I never existed for her. Mr. Sullivan, she was only 6 when the accident happened, and she went through enormous trauma. Her brain blocked the memories as a defense mechanism, but they're still in there. With time and patience, they can come back. And if they don't, then you build new memories, starting now. Today was just the first day. It will get better, I promise. But it got better very slowly. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael visited the house 3 times a week. Each visit was a mixture of joy and agony. Clara began to get used to him, to look forward to his visits, even to show some affection. But she still saw him as Uncle Michael, the nice man who came to play, not as her father. Helen watched everything from a distance, her heart torn. On one hand, she was relieved that Clara was gradually opening up to Michael. It meant that when the time came for the full transition, it would be easier for the girl. But on the other hand, every bit of progress was a reminder that her time with Clara was running out. It was in the 3rd week that something changed. Michael, following the suggestion of the child psychologist now involved in the case, brought an old photo album. Pictures of Sophia as a baby, of her birthdays, of family outings with Claire. He wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but he was desperate for her to remember something, anything. Clara, there's something I wanted to show you. Michael opened the album carefully. These are pictures of a girl who is very special to me. Want to see? Clara came closer, curious. She began to flip through the pages with Michael. And then she stopped at a specific photo. It was Sophia at 5 on Claire's lap, both smiling at the camera in a park. Clara touched the photo with her index finger, tracing the outline of Claire's face. I know her. Clara's voice was soft, almost a whisper. She used to sing to me. Helen, who was in the kitchen, heard and felt her blood run cold. Jessica leaned forward, attentive. Michael could barely breathe. You remember her? He asked gently. Clara frowned, concentrating. Sometimes I dream about her. She had long hair and smelled like flowers, and she sang a song about stars, Michael completed, his voice thick with emotion. Twinkle, twinkle, little star? Clara looked at him, surprised. How did you know? Because she's your mommy, and I'm your daddy, and we both love you very much. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara looked at the photo, then at Michael, then at Helen, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway, pale as a sheet. And then, for the first time, something clicked in the girl's mind. It wasn't a complete memory, not a recollection of everything that had happened, but it was a connection, a spark of recognition. But then who is she? Clara pointed to Helen, clear confusion on her face. Is she my mommy too? It's complicated, sweetie, Jessica intervened, using the gentle tone she had perfected over years of working with children in difficult situations. Miss Helen took care of you when you were lost and scared. She loved you and protected you. But Mr. Michael is your real daddy, and the lady in the picture, Claire, was your mommy. Clara began to cry. Not a cry of sadness, but of confusion and emotional overload. Helen couldn't control herself. She ran to the girl and hugged, her murmuring words of comfort. Michael stood there, helpless, watching his daughter seek comfort in the arms of another woman. And it was in that moment that something extraordinary happened. Gabriel, who had been silent all these weeks, finally spoke up. He got up from the sofa and went to Michael. Sir, I think we should all talk. Not just the grown-ups, Clara too. She deserves to know the whole truth, the right way. Jessica looked at the boy, surprised. Gabriel was right. They had been trying to protect Clara by withholding details, but maybe it was time for an honest conversation, adapted to her level but complete. "You're right, Gabriel," Jessica said. "Let's do that, but in a way that's appropriate for her age." Calmly. And so, that afternoon, sitting together in the small living room of that house in Bridgeport, the whole truth was finally revealed to Clara. Jessica masterfully guided the conversation, explaining about the accident, about how Clara had been lost and scared, about how Helen had found her and cared for her with love, but also about how it had been wrong not to return her to her father, and about how Michael had searched for her every single day without rest because he loved her infinitely. Clara listened in silence, holding Helen's hand on one side and the photo album on the other. When the story ended, she asked the question that would both break and rebuild everyone's heart. "Can I have two families?" The room fell silent. Helen looked at Michael. Michael looked at Jessica. Gabriel looked at his sister with hope in his eyes. Jessica took a deep breath. The truth was, the legal decision had already been made. Sophia would have to go back to live with her father. But the way it was done could, in fact, preserve her bond with Helen if everyone agreed. "Clara, you're going to live with your daddy, Michael. He is your real family," Jessica explained carefully. "But we can arrange for you to visit Miss Helen and Gabriel sometimes. If everyone agrees, of course." Michael felt pride and anger war within him. Anger because this woman had stolen a year of his daughter's life, but also a strange gratitude because, in the end, Helen had saved Sophia when no one else could. And Clara loved Helen. That was undeniable. To completely sever that bond would be cruel. "Okay," Michael heard himself say, almost surprised by his own words. "We can arrange visits." Helen looked up, tears streaming freely. "Really? Really? But with rules, and under supervision, at least at first, because even though I accept that you cared for my daughter, I can't forget that she was also taken from me because of you." "I'll accept anything, any rule," Helen said fervently. "Just don't take her away from me completely. Please." And so began an even more complicated phase, the transition. Clara started visiting Michael's new home, a small but cozy apartment he had, managed to rent in the Andersonville neighborhood. He had bought used but good furniture, decorated her room with a teddy bear just like the one she had at Helen's, and put up pink curtains she had mentioned she liked. The first few nights were terrible. Clara cried, asking for Helen, saying she wanted to go home. Michael would stay up by her bed, singing the same song Claire used to sing, holding her small hand until she finally fell asleep from exhaustion. And then he would cry too, alone in the kitchen, questioning if he was doing the right thing, if he wasn't just traumatizing his daughter more in the process of bringing her back. But gradually, very gradually, Clara began to adapt. The nightmares about the accident returned, stronger now that the memories were being unearthed. Michael spent entire nights awake, comforting her, explaining that she was safe, that he was there, and would never leave her again. Therapy with the child psychologist was crucial, giving Clara tools to process both the old trauma and the present changes. And the visits to Helen, which happened every Saturday morning, became an anchor of stability. Clara would run into Helen's arms, with joy play with Gabriel, and have lunch in the small house that had been her home for a year. And then, at the end of the afternoon, she would go home with Michael, bringing drawings she had made and stories to tell about her day. They were difficult months. There were setbacks, moments when Clara got confused about who was who, times she called Helen Mommy and Michael Uncle. There were nights when Michael doubted if he could raise his daughter alone, without Claire, especially now that Clara had so many emotional wounds to heal. There were times when Helen almost gave up on the visits because it was too painful to hand Clara back at the end of the day. But they persisted, all of them, because at the center of it all was a little girl who had been through more than any child should have to, and who deserved to have adults around her willing to do the hard and painful work to ensure she had a chance to be happy again. 2 years passed. Clara, now 8, was doing well in school. She had friends, participated in school plays, and brought home drawings with pride. She called Michael Dad naturally, without hesitation. The memories of Claire had returned, bringing both pain and comfort. She could talk about her mother without breaking down, could look at old photos and smile through her tears. And Helen remained a part of her life, no longer as a mother in the traditional sense, but as someone important, like a beloved aunt, like a second family. Gabriel and Clara were truly siblings now, united by an unusual but real history. Michael and Helen never exactly became friends. There was too much history, too much pain between them for that. But they reached a mutual respect. Michael acknowledged that despite her monumental mistake, Helen had acted out of love. And Helen never again tried to question or interfere in Michael's parenting of Clara, respecting the established boundaries and rules. On a sunny Sunday, 3 years after that first meeting, Michael hosted a small barbecue at his apartment. He invited a few friends from his new job, some parents of Clara's schoolmates, and, to the surprise of many, he also invited Helen and Gabriel. Clara ran across the building's shared lawn, playing with Gabriel and other children. Her laughter echoed, clear and genuine. Michael watched from a distance, flipping burgers on the grill, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Helen approached timidly, holding a soda. They stood there in silence for a moment, both watching the children play. "She's happy," Helen said finally. "Truly happy." "She is," Michael agreed. "And a big part of that is thanks to you, for taking care of her when I couldn't. And for you fighting for her when I didn't want to let go," Helen replied. "I think in the end she needed both of us in different ways, but she did." Michael didn't answer, but he gave a slight nod. It was the closest they would ever come to peace between them. And maybe it was enough. That night, after everyone had gone home, Michael tucked Clara into bed. She was exhausted but happy, clutching the old teddy bear that had come from Helen's house but now lived here. "Dad," Clara said, nearly asleep, "can I ask a question?" "Of course, Princess." "If I had to choose just one family, which one would I choose?" Michael felt his heart clench, but then he realized she wasn't really asking. She was just checking if she still had permission to love everyone. That's not a choice you ever have to make. You can love Aunt Helen and Gabriel, and at the same time love me and love the memory of your mom, Claire. Love doesn't have a limit, you see? You don't have to choose. Clara smiled, her eyes already closed. "Okay, good, because I love everybody, even if it's confusing sometimes." "I know, honey, I know." Michael kissed her forehead and left the room, leaving the door ajar as she liked. In the living room, he picked up the framed photo of Claire from the sideboard. He looked at the face of the wife he had lost, at the smile he would never see in person again, at the eyes that would never watch their daughter grow up. "She's okay, Claire," he whispered to the photo. "It was hard. It was complicated, but she's okay. And I promise I'll keep taking care of her. Forever." Outside, the city of Chicago stretched out, illuminated under the starry sky. And somewhere in that city, in a small house in Bridgeport, Helen was also looking at the sky, silently grateful for having been, even for a limited and twisted time, a part of that special girl's life. The story didn't have a traditionally happy ending. Not all the loose ends were tied up perfectly. There was no complete justice or absolute forgiveness. But it had something perhaps more important. It had healing, gradual, imperfect, but real, and sometimes that's all we can ask for. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Helen, and Clara has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of love, loss, guilt, and redemption, please leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments which moment struck you the most. Was it Michael's tireless search, Helen's impossible dilemma between what was right and what was love, or Clara's innocence navigating between two worlds? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the most complex and profound side of the human soul, showing that life doesn't always offer simple answers, but it always offers a chance to start over. We'll see you in the next episode, where another story of true emotions will make you reflect on what family, forgiveness, and unconditional love truly mean.